mean? That means that we take a look at what cannabis regulation will do, and we put minorities and disfranchised communities at the forefront of this, right? We know we have a long history of the drug war. Now that legalization is happening, how do we now create opportunities to integrate the generations like farmers, just like in Mexico, just like in Colombia? Our farmers in California are Latinos. They're mostly Mexican, right? And one of the things that cannot happen in California because of federal prohibition is these farmers cannot work in a wheat farm, right? They could be working in a strawberry farm, in a blueberry farm. Almonds are huge here in California, but if an illegal immigrant is caught working in a marijuana farm, that is immediate deportation without reentry for life. So, those are some things that we still haven't figured out and worked out because of federal prohibition, but definitely something that we work on a local level to create protections and create opportunities to enter. So, to answer your question about how do we create these equitable opportunities for farmers, generational farmers, right? So one of the things that MCBA does very well is write policy, and part of the policy that we've written policy for over 5 years now, and we have a ongoing document every year. MCBA hosts a in-person seminar or congress, like an in-person congress of less than 30 people, and these 30 people are strategically selected. It is an invite only type of event, but we take 3 days out of the year where we sit in small working groups. And this year we had to do it online because of COVID, just like everyone else. But these focus groups have been anywhere from 20 to 27 focus groups and topics that we are all discussing. And the people in this room are regulators in the industry from different parts of the country. They're different types of operators, from cultivators to retailers to manufacturers of edibles. There's also activists, other organizations, whether it's Drug Policy Alliance or like Chirla, who does immigration work in the United States, right? And what we do is we produce a template of regulation at a local, state, and federal level, and then that set of ideas then goes to a group of attorneys who then turn those ideas into policy language. Then it comes back to the group, and we've revised this draft. And in the revision, there might be some changes that come about. And once those changes are done, we share it with local governments, state governments, and we publish it through our network. And that document is intended to be a template. So anyone in cannabis regulation can take that template and add or delete, use it as they see fit to their local market. What we've been able to do is provide a resource, right? Writing regulation takes time, it takes resources, it takes money, and a lot of the people in position in regulators, they're not operators. They don't understand what even a supply chain needs to look like and how do you regulate the supply chain. So that was really the goal of MCBA. Now, this year in 2020, we are launching the Asamblea Internacional, which is what we've been doing in English. Now we're going to do it in Spanish. And on September 22nd, we're launching the first of many events that'll come after this, and with the intent of making it an annual reunion. Why? Because as we produce these legislative works, they need to be updated frequently, because regulation, like most people know that are in the industry, changes drastically. And one of the things that we do focus on is creating an entryway for people that have been impacted by the drug war and have been working in the industry prior to it being a regulated industry. And I had about, I want to say 2018, I had a similar congress at, it was La Universidad Autónoma de Guerrero. And Guerrero is known for their cultivation of amapola and marijuana. And one of the biggest concerns from this, and a lot of indigenous communities came to this class I gave at the university, and their biggest concerns were they were being left out of the game, right? Because now you open it up, Mexico legalized for pharmaceutical and scientific investigation. Well, where do they fit in? And I think it is necessary for us to have these conversations and be allies and advocates for these communities, because through legalization, we know we're going to have billions of dollars being injected into the economy, right?
And Jazmin, sorry, but Annette is now here. So please let me to stop the conversation at this point, and then in the next round of participations, I would like to, if you can continue with that point, it will be perfect. Okay. So Annette, we are so sorry, technical problems in particular in this room were horrible, but we are happy that you're finally here. I would like to introduce Annette Henry, who is an attorney at law, and she was the first director of licensing and applications at the Cannabis Licensing Authority in Jamaica. So this institution was created by the Jamaican government after the decriminalization of certain uses and certain quantities of cannabis. So Annette, the first question that we did around and in relation, we are trying to analyze the new Mexican framework in relation to your own experiences in your jurisdiction. So the first question that we did to Jazmin and to Andres was how do we can integrate the farmers into the new legal framework? What are the incentives in order to create a regulated market with farmers and with people who has been most affected by the prohibition?
Right, thank you. Happy to join.
You're on mute.
Yeah. Right. All right. Thank you very much, and to your audience. The matter of integrating small farmers has been a challenge I have noticed in Jamaica and also the Caribbean and the rest of the world. Based on my experience, I believe that deliberate steps have to be taken and it become a part of policy, where the legal and regulatory framework provides for how a particular country would incorporate small traditional farmers in the cannabis industry. Why do I say so? Most of the application and licensing regime looking at medicinal, there are requirements, and some persons, upon examining those requirements, see those as barriers to the entrance of small traditional farmers who may not have the startup capital and the finances. So I would recommend, based on my experience, for deliberate steps to be taken by particular governments, having acknowledged the realities of small traditional farmers, to incorporate and provide for them in the system. So for example, there may be waiver or no fee requirement. and some of the security requirements. Do you need all those requirements? And that is the kind of discussion that one has to have in looking at what challenges that these small farmers are experiencing and what the law should do to make them, I wouldn't want to say treat them differently, but it's an acknowledgement of their realities and try to make it a fairer trade because of who they are. It's basically accepting the small traditional farmer at the stage that they're at.
Thank you, Annette. I think this is really, really important. Also, precisely the Caribbean is having like this discussion, and it is very important to take into account the traditional farmers and those who really have the knowledge and the know-how about how to develop this market and to transform it in a legal market. Andres, I would like to back to you because I have a question in particular. You mentioned that this like process of characterization of seeds could be like very useful. And we have like something similar in the Cannabis Act, Mexican Cannabis Act, with this requirement to register all the seeds and to show and to prove, demonstrate that they are legal or they are from legal markets or jurisdictions. But you're saying that basically we can have a registry, but in order to have this characterization of seeds, for different uses and different purposes, but it does not have to be necessarily a barrier to the local seeds or to the local farmers?
Well, it's a standard process in order not only to provide a document that proves that the strains and seeds that I have are legal, but are also related, for instance, to the weather, the rain conditions of the particular region where that strain is going to be grown. So it is also providing an starting base of information in order to be able to predict the behavior of this particular strain in this particular region. So at the end, it has the two purposes: providing the legal document for you to start in the let's say licensing process, but also giving you information about how your strain is going to behave. Because, for instance, in Colombia, it has been said since decades that there are some natural strains from the North Coast, Santa Marta, also from Cauca. We know like some colloquial names, Corinto, Mangovicho, well, a lot of names. But if you go to the universities, of course, to the published data, you don't find any information about what is the THC content, what is the plagues that can affect the plant, whether it is cultivated under greenhouse conditions or open air. So you can also get some information that it's useful for the production point of view.
But I mean, for example, minorities or small growers or peasants, for example, should be like, or should have like this like company of the government in order to fulfill all the requirements for the register. I mean, we cannot expect that all the farmers can afford or can know this process. So maybe the government should stay like besides them together in order to complete this process.
It's an important question because it's everything in the industry cost. I mean, the characterization of seeds, the testing also of the THC content in the products, everything in this industry it has a cost. And in Colombia, at least, if you want to give like economic support in a particular business, you cannot do it unless it is included in the law, because it is only the power of the legislative branch of power to give not only to implement taxes or any related to taxation, but also to give, let's say, discounts or differential cost for some specific populations, whether indigenous populations or small farmers. So it was not included in the law from the Congress any possibility of these agencies of the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, to have different codes. But at the end, I think that if it is important to have a more comprehensive and complete view of the value chain, because yes, you will have to pay for the strain registration, but later you will have to pay for A, B, C, D, E, and F in front of the authorities to get license, to get import, export permit, etc. And of course, this is only also a portion of the total investment that you will also have to make in infrastructure, in staff. I mean, a lot of investment has to be done during the cannabis industry, and it's important to know what is your capacity. And in Colombia, it was not possible to define by the government during the development of the regulation how to have differential costs or differential approaches to small farmers or indigenous people.
Yeah, so it is basic and fundamental to have different approaches and different and to take into account like those differences at least.
Yes, and as Annette just mentioned, it has to be in the original law if you want really to open access and make it possible for small farmers, etc., etc. From the original law, you maybe need to go to the Ministry of Economy or Finance and see what is the money that you have in order to implement, because otherwise you can have everything written, but these populations are not going to afford.
Implementation is like different.
Exactly.
Jazmin, thank you for the link of the Asamblea Internacional. We're going to share it, but I wanted to and you can continue with the explanation that that you were doing, but I want to add some particular point, because taking into account that you are working very near with, you are part of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. What are the barriers that a small cannabis business are like facing regarding, for example, packaging and excessive requirements, not only to obtain a license, but also to produce and this value and this chain value? What are the main problems that a small business and minorities are facing in your own jurisdiction and in your experience?
The biggest challenges and barriers, of course, are access to capital, right? Like that is the cherry on everybody's pie. Everyone needs access to capital. And I think that the other challenges that I faced in the industry are definitely corporations that are able to fundraise millions and millions of dollars now, that come in and lobby regulators on the way to shape the industry. And because these big corporations lack understanding of the industry, they're one, over regulating, and two, regulating with the wrong approach. So at the end of the day, cannabis is still a localized market. So as a small business owner, I come from a family-owned business background, so I understand small business. I know how to get from point A to point B and how to get to a point where you're thriving in your small business, right? So like any other business, you're going to have your challenges. And the fail rate for small businesses in the United States is up to 69%, which is very high. And this is before COVID, right? So you throw in bad regulation, federal prohibition on top of that, then your fail rate is going to continue to go up. It's important that you stay frugal and be as involved as possible in your local market, meaning secure your supply chain locally, have access to your elected officials. At the end of the day, your elected officials work for you. Your community elected them, not the corporation. So one of the things that we have seen here in the US was all these other corporations that came in with $40 million to start now have $40 million in deficits, and they're in the red, right? So I'm sure you guys have seen many articles that paint this horrible picture of, millions of dollars are owed in overhead and lost product. And for various reasons, these large corporations are failing, and their failures are very different than my failures. I don't owe anyone $40 million, right? So I see that as a win. I think that in Mexico, one of the things that I do agree with Annette is the need for reduced fees, because these processes are not new to regulators, right? Like you have to pay certain fees to be in business, whether you're growing corn or you're growing cannabis. Like these things have to happen. The thing I think that Mexico definitely needs to take into account is that Mexico has been a leading producer of cannabis for many years. So there's already an existing supply chain in Mexico. So calling the legal registry of legal seeds into Mexico, you're talking about import. The only way you're going to get legal or the right legality of seeds in Mexico are going to have to be imported. And I don't think that should be the case. I think that Mexico should open up El Registro Nacional, the National Registry of Seeds, within Mexico and allow people to register the existing seeds in Mexico. And one of the misconceptions that come from markets like the United States and Colombia and Uruguay is that they're a lot more advanced when it comes to the research done in cannabis, and that's incorrect. In the United States, because we don't have federal regulation, our scientific research is very limited and it's not FDA approved. So when you legalize a country like Mexico, you have the ability to fast track 5 years worth of scientific research with the IP that's been created in the US with actual Mexican product. When we're talking about just pharmaceutical, you're having maybe acres worth of product for one end purpose. And that's where we are disconnected, and we need to diversify the use of the plant, right? We cannot take and produce one pill and take the rest of the plant and use and waste it, label it as waste and biochemical waste that has to have its certain criteria of how you dispose of it. That could be turned into a multitude of things, and now you create profitable income and economic advantages towards those cultivators by allowing them to diversify their product. Yeah. So I think that's one of the things we need to talk about legislation is diversifying that product.
Totally. Thank you, Jazmin. I am taking notes because we have like a lot of things to discuss. And please feel free, the other participants. I mean, Andrés, Annette, and and Jazmin to share more comments on your fellow participants. But Annette, I'm going to give you floor, but also I hear that you said that it is important to have this knowledge of the reality of growers, but how to involve them during the legislative process or during the regulatory process that is going to finish in the creation of a new regulatory framework? How to involve them? How to learn from them? How to listen? Please, you have the floor.
That's for me, Tanya? Right. I'm glad you pick up on that point, and I support the views made by my other colleagues. Importantly, when you're developing an industry, it is important to identify the stakeholders who will be affected. It is very important that you consult with those traditional farmers. In also consulting with them, I would say do not bring them in. Sometimes you have to go to their location, because when you go to their location, you also get to understand the environment within which they operate, the terrain and their realities. So one thing, you'd have to take them to the table, but instead of bringing the table to them, you go out into the field and you have that discussion with them. There's something I want to highlight though, is that in the Caribbean, we're seeing that there are many discussions, because quite often it comes up to say that these were the persons who fought for the liberation and for it to be treated in a particular way. So what persons are saying, much more is needed than talk. So I would recommend to Mexico to ensure that the challenges that other Caribbean countries are encountering with traditional farmers, that they see what they are encountering and seek to address that. For example, most of the legislation, say for St. Vincent and the Grenadines to some extent, there's no legal recognition and legal definition of traditional cannabis and ganja or cannabis farmers. So the first thing is that the law should recognize that those farmers, so you don't need to leave it to others to wonder who they are. So therefore a definition is needed. I do not know what my friend would be able to tell me. For example, in Jamaica, there are some farmers who benefit from concessions, subsidiaries, among other things in the agricultural sector. The cannabis farmers, so far, they're unable to benefit from those concessions and subsidiaries. So therefore, they will say that there are certain laws that prohibit those. So Mexico would have to ensure that if there's any law that is prohibiting a cannabis farmer from benefiting from concessions and those other things, that there are consequential amendments to the law. Because you do not want to have the industry going and then you leave these group of farmers feeling as if they have not been adequately incorporated. To support my friend Andrés, he also talked about the value chain. And the value chain is very important, because the farmers may be able to grow the cannabis, but you also want them to enjoy the research and development and the product that comes out of the value chain. In addition to that too, I would recommend that the status, the cannabis plant, should be treated as an agricultural plant. And therefore, when you're putting in requirements and regulation, you will come to appreciate that you're not regulating a textbook, as is, you're regulating a plant that has its own features, compositions, just to name a few. So I summarize by saying, and we have seen it in the Caribbean, is that deliberate and legislative steps must be taken to recognize traditional farmers. There will be discontent if the regulations continue to be general. In addition to that, we recognize that small farmers may have to work with those other farmers that may have infrastructure. And therefore, in Jamaica, persons have been exploring what is known as a mother farm concept. A mother farm concept where you have big farmers working with small farmers. And don't get me wrong, this is not a system where the small farmer will be treated as a worker. The small farmer will be integrated in this process. His experience and know-how is valued, and he participates, is not treated as an employee. So these are some of the things that Mexico should take into consideration in dealing with its traditional farmers. And you also have to recognize the traditional farm and the traditional cultivation areas. How do you treat with those areas? So these are some of the things that they have to examine closely and provide for, if not immediately, in the near future. But what I would humbly recommend, do not start off or do not start the process without fully examining how the traditional farmers should be incorporated. Let it be legislation, regulations, and policy. Very important.
Thank you, Annette. Oh my God, I wish to have 1 more hour to have this discussion with you all. Thank you so much for your comments and for sure like these experiences. I know, Andrés, that you are very involved like with these rules on testing and traceability, and from the vision of MUCD, in our opinion, those requirements are really hard to fulfill for small producers and for small participants in the chain in general. We also are very conscious about that we need specific standards and international standards about it, but traceability and testing requirements could be more than only a standard, and could represent, if we adopt hard measures on traceability and testing, could represent a barrier for entry of farmers and small growers in the market.
I think that the answer depends strongly of which kind of markets we are talking about, because definitely let's assume that the regulation has like the purpose or the effect that Alejandro was mentioning in the previous conference, that is establishing a production in Mexico for the international medical market. In that case, the standards about quality and testing and traceability are not even handled, are not in the possibility to be handled by the Mexican authorities. Exactly. We don't decide. In Colombia, for instance, we included as only testing the THC and CBD content in flower and in the extracts are, let's say, the only pharmaceutical or quality standard. But when you are going to export to Europe or Brazil, for instance, which is one of the most promising markets in South America for medical cannabis, the standards are just pharma, and then the list of items that you need to test in order to comply with those markets, it is not 40 or 50 items, and each one of them is a lot of money. Pesticides is a lot of money, heavy metals, etc., etc. Shelf life. Therefore, in pharma, it's difficult for the government to decide which are the standards, because at the end they are global. And particularly, it is an important discussion from also what Annette presented, is not only involving the traditional knowledge and regions, but also the traditional medicine, because In Europe, for instance, cannabis is not recognized as an herbal medicine. It is not the case in Brazil as well. And according to the draft regulation that is circulating these weeks in Mexico for the medical side, it is also closed that possibility of herbal medicines, which sometimes you can, let's say, not have the most, it's not that they are lower quality, but sometimes it's easier to go to the herbals because you need lower investment in the production and development. But for the recreational or adult use market, you have the first is that it by definition is only national, because it's not possible for now to think about an international market for adult use. Therefore, you have all the possibility to have different standards and to define which are the minimum, of course, quality standard, because if not only because of the freedom of developing our personality, but also the public health approach is one of the key drivers in the cannabis regulation, and therefore you don't want to treat adult users without the proper quality standards and so on. But maybe there is an option, and this has to be decided now with the law, because if you don't include it in the law later, when you are drafting the regulation or the small pieces, you are not going to have the chance to go back and change the original law. It's now that you can define, and this is something that definitely has to be done with the Ministry of Finance or Economy. How can you use or capture some resources from the value chain, I don't know, taxes or something similar, and for instance, having public funded testing centers when you as a small farmer can go, because analytical chemistry is expensive. Sometimes you have and I remember when we were characterizing the recreational market in Colombia, because one cigarette of cannabis in Colombia is $1, and the process of characterization in order to find the THC CBD content, it's $200, something like that. So of course, this is going to be a barrier for small farmers. But if you find a way to, as a state, provide those resources which you are identifying since this very early stage as the barriers, it's a possibility. Maybe the public universities or the Ministry of Health or COFEPRIS itself can have a testing lab that can provide this kind of test for free or for lower prices for small growers.
Got it. Thank you, Andres. And I have like more practical question. If you have like 10 more minutes available to keep this conversation, because we start like 20 minutes later. So if you agree to stay 10 more minutes or 15 minutes, I really, really appreciate that. If it is okay for you, all the speakers, okay, fantastic. So my question, and is for both Annette and Jazmin, is what do you think about these affirmative actions included in the Mexican Cannabis Act, talking about growers, like have like a specific number of licenses for small growers or peasants during the first years, and to have this possibility to do not have like I mean, according to the framework, the licenses are mutually excluded. So it is not possible to have more than one kind of type of license, but not for growers. It is allowed to have different types of license. So what do you think? Are these kind of affirmative actions, affirmative measures enough, or do you think that they are going to work in practice in order to include these people in the legal market? Please take the floor, Annette or Jazmin. Your
Right. I have started to look at some of those affirmations, and one may say it is a start, but I think more, it could go further in relation to the cultivators and the growers. What will happen though is, how will these things work practically when the law is and the regulations are being implemented? So one may say that it is a start, but whether it's wide enough, I think.
Annette, I think I can't hear you. I don't know what happened with your connection, but maybe we can turn to Jazmin. In the meanwhile, we can solve the problem with Annette. Thank you, Jazmin.
I think that it's good to have these provisions, right? Or these priorities. They're priorities, but the thing that limits small farmers with these priorities is going to be capital. So if you don't have the capital to back up those priorities, we're not going to get anywhere. And the other thing that I think is important is there are manufacturers out there, cultivators that have a seed to final product process, right? So if they're not able to have the licenses necessary to go from a seed to their final product and get to market, then they're going to have to outsource these different processes, and that all costs money. And your margins keep going down and down and down every single time you have to split your process. So I think that's one of the things that concerns me with the limited licenses. Also, once you get to market, like, what is that capacity, right? Like, we're talking about a federalized market reach. Here in California, when we look at the city of LA, we have 200 retail shops. So that's 200 dispensaries. Before regulation, we had over 1,000. Post-regulation, we only have 200. So those 200 that are licensed and regulated don't have the product to supply the demand. Why? Because the other licenses were not issued. Therefore, the supply chain couldn't get product going. And then you have smaller brands, very specific formulations and products that require a vertical integration, right? And when you're talking about a pharmaceutical grade product versus a product artesanal, un producto artesanal, it's two different ways of producing, right? So your GMP certification alone is costly in the millions and millions of dollars, and that certification isn't necessarily required in the more holistic wellness supply chain, right? Not to say that you're not going to have a consumable product that's high quality. Of course you are, but it doesn't need those pharmaceutical grade equipment and pharmaceutical grade certification. So I think that's definitely something that Mexico needs to talk about. I know with the regulations that Senadora Sanchez Cordero put together, talk about el Instituto de Cannabis, right? So this institution is supposed to regulate the the small farmers. And part of that institution, they're recommending that the government collect all of the product that is grown from local farms or from personal cultivation. And then the government test that product, categorize that product, and find a an outlet, right? So I think, I mean, I don't really know how I feel about it, because one, then the government becomes the monopolizer of the product, right? And do we know, I mean, Mexico's known for corruption and it's known for pocketing money already. So that's always a concern of mine. Like, how do I know that they're negotiating the best price for my crop? I don't, right? In general. So however, I do think if done right with the right structure, you can create a profitable margin for your community and be the intercepting piece that ensures the quality of the product. So it is a great concept. It is a great idea. I like it. I just don't like the history that we have as Mexicans when it comes to regulating for our people, right? So it's a give and take. I think we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to this institution, but I think that other countries and states like in the US, we can learn from that process, because when you're talking about import and export, it's going to require a government entity to intervene and make sure that those purchase orders and funds are coming from a legitimate place. And then you have the ability to contract local farmers to do that work. And you have them set with the correct guidelines, with the correct equipment, correct process that your buyer is going to need. And you're going to ensure that they have a living wage for the work that they do.
Thank you, Jazmin. Annette, I think is here again. Annette, can you hear us? Or you're on mute, but if you can open your micro. Okay, we can wait for Annette, and in the meanwhile, here we have here we have like two questions. One of them is related to organized crime and violence. I mean, Mexico and Colombia are really different from the Caribbean and from other jurisdictions in terms of sometimes growers and peasants are like in some conflicted areas and are suffer also violence in their communities by different groups. So how to deal with that? I mean, the production has to be like safe for peasants, safe for people who participate in the distribution or in the next steps of the chain. But how to deal with that in countries where some of the growers and some of these communities are facing or are in the middle of different kinds of violence? Please go ahead if you want.
I think that, you know, it's a very difficult question. These are generations of hurt. This didn't happen overnight. The drug war did not happen yesterday. It took many years for us to get to where we're at. I think, first off, if we're going to legalize a federal market, you need to provide clemency and reentry to all the people that are in jail for now something that's going to be legal. That's a given, right? Like non-criminal offenses, people shouldn't still be in jail for something else that corporations are not going to be profiting off of, right? I heard a statistic in Mexico where 60% of the people that have been arrested for nonviolent crimes are women. So it's interesting that women are more disfranchised than men in Mexico when it comes to cannabis legalization, right? And we're talking about mothers, we're talking about sisters, and different areas of Mexico that women have already suffered through, right? It's not just drug criminalization. There's different attacks that come towards women when it comes in the country of Mexico. So I think that first off, we need to take a good look at what our judicial system is doing and what we can do to allow people to be removed from that criminal background and integrated back into society. And it goes beyond that. Now we need to provide resources, because being in jail and you have to have the right support to be able to integrate back into society. So that in my opinion is number one. As far as organized crime, I think it's going to take us years to get through these hardships that we took years to create. But legalization is definitely in the right direction to start making those amends. And I see Annette rejoined us, so I'll go ahead and
Yes, thank you, Annette. I think that we should close the session. So Annette, if you can talk about the last question, and you can give us a conclusion or an advice from your experience to this path that Mexico is taking. You're on mute. Yeah.
Right. Great to be back. Some internet challenges, right? The last question had to do with the affirmative action. That's the last, right. As I've indicated, I must commend Mexico to some extent for making some special provisions for peasants, the indigenous community, and women. As I've indicated to you, while we commend, is this extensive enough, and should they go further? In addition to that, though, I also know that they have done the 5-year as a measure of social injustice. For 40% of the cultivation licenses must be granted, preferable to these indigenous communities. And I would say commendable as a start, but should go further. Because what you don't want, for example, it limits that kind of concession or privilege, for want of a better term, to only the cultivation side. And as my colleague said, there is much more in the cannabis industry rather than just cultivation. So I would say that while that is considered, it should be much more than cultivation. There's something that I also want to highlight. Expungement of criminal record is very important for these peasants and indigenous members from communities, because if there's no law that will allow those records to be expunged, then these farmers will continue to have these offenses against their record, against the same plant that we are now seeking, and we have acknowledged that there is medicinal properties in it. So I would end by saying the affirmative actions, they're duly noted. They could go further, and much more is to be done in relation to the expungement of criminal records for these farmers in the cannabis industry.
Thank you so much, Annette. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your experiences with us. We both had technical problems, but we are really, really happy to having you here and to listen from your experience. Andrés, a last final message that you that you can provide and advice. I think that one thing that you emphasized during the conversation was that one thing is the law, one thing is it is like this legal framework, but the implementation is another big challenge, or has its own big challenges. So what are the main recommendations to do this implementation and this transition from an illegal market to a legal market, like more soft or as soft as possible?
Yes, I would
Especially for growers.
say, Tanya, thank you. Don't overestimate the market, because as of today, I see that, let's say, the industrial, the hemp market is seen like the opportunity. Okay, medical is difficult, the quality standards, recreational is not possible unless you internally decide, like you are doing in Mexico, very good. But then you take a look of the industrial, and to be honest, the numbers are not that good as it seems during the some investor conferences 3 years, 4 years ago. And the medical market is also not to overestimate, because as I mentioned, the challenges are huge. Big markets like Canada, I remember in Colombia, 90% of companies and entrepreneurs and small farmers at that time in 2016 were thinking, we're going to export to Canada, and as of today, we know that that is not possible. The total market in Europe, I don't know, in numbers, it's about 250,000 million euros, something like that. It's not, I mean, it's big, but it's not that immense as we thought it was. And of course, the investment and all what you have to do in order to get those markets are challenging. But finally, now that you're having the opportunity in Mexico to regulate the internal adult use market, it is also important, as Alejandro also mentioned it, is how you understand the market in order not to make it grow, because at the end it's, yes, a substance with risk, and of course the Ministry of Health is not going to be happy if the cannabis consumption in Mexico is increasing. But in Colombia, we had like this expectation about, because we didn't limit the number of license to be granted, and today we have more than 1,000 license, and only for medical and scientific and industrial uses, and the market is so small that at the end, this expectation and all the process, and when you have these big expectations, you are also attracting the organized crime at the end, as let's say a side effect, because if they say, okay, I can go there because there is so much money and I can put my product, or I can take products from that value chain, but at the end is not that big. The internal market can be big, and you have all the possibility to regulate. You don't, for the internal Mexican market, for adult use, you have all the possibilities to decide to use experiences from Uruguay, from Netherlands, from the US, and have the best possible regulation for yourselves.
Thank you so much, Andres. And Jazmin, a last message, and I want to if you can like imagine an scenario where you are representing the small business associations before the Senate or the legislative branch in Mexico. What are the three main things that you recommend at least to include in this bill in order to guarantee the inclusion of this kind of small business or small participants?
I think representation, right? There's many things that need to happen in order for us to thrive, but one of the things that I don't see enough is people voicing their opinion. We've had a last few weeks, actually, from June, where between the COFEPRIS y la COFEMER have been having communication when it comes to regulations, right? And I've seen very little involvement from the community. And as much as, and I always ask this question, why are you not telling them what they should be doing? And people, or the response I hear is, well, that's their job. They have to do it. They have to put the regulations together. And I'm like, that's been their job since 2017, and we still don't have regulations. So at the end of the day, it's going to require people and there's very smart individuals in the room when it comes to Mexico, but it's work. To sit down and write recommendations is a lot of work. And whether we like it or not, we have to do that work. That's our responsibility. So with the work that I've done in the US is write recommendations. I sit at city council meetings sometimes for 10 hours. And cannabis is not the only thing that's on the agenda, but I have to sit through that whole meeting and wait for cannabis to come and take notes, go back, do research, write a long email response to my elected officials and my regulators. And then I have to follow up. And I have to continue knocking at those doors. So I think as I do lobbying in Mexico, my response to my community is going to be, where are you? How can I count on you to be a support to the work that I'm doing? Because it's going to take the collective effort of everyone that wants to be involved in this industry to voice their opinion as of now. We cannot wait for the regulations to come out, because then it's too late. If you don't agree with something, the time to speak up is now. So use your power, use your resources, and get to work.
Thank you, Jazmin, and thank you to all our participants for being here, for your patience, and for stay here for more minutes. We really appreciate that. And thank you for sharing your experiences. We hope to see you maybe next year talking about the implementation process in Mexico, or how success, how the civil society was into taking these advices and including them in the cannabis bill or in the Cannabis Act. So we are really happy to have this conversation with you. We have to close. We are like over the time since like 15 minutes ago. And I just want to close with the comments in Spanish of Gerardo Álvarez, who's going to provide like these conclusions and the conclusions of this panel for the public. We have like a few comments here, like talking about that. Yes, we are aware about that Mexico have like different situations that have been taken into account, like organized crime, institutional capacity to enforce the regulation, agricultural capacity, crop switching, and we talked about it with Irene Alvarez in the morning, and we are aware of those things, but we want to share experiences from other jurisdictions. So thank you so much again. Gerardo, you have the floor in Spanish to close this conversation. Gracias a todos y a todas.
Gracias, Tania. Primero que nada, agradecer a Andrés, a Jazmin y a Annette que nos acompañaran. La idea de este foro era precisamente nutrir la conversación que se está teniendo en el Senado actualmente, ¿no? Que se ha caracterizado mucho por ser bastante opaca y por ser que no involucra mucho a la ciudadanía, ¿no? En ese sentido me gustaría señalar como una idea central algo que mencionaron tanto Andrés como Annette, que sobre la importancia del momento actual, ¿no? El momento legislativo por sobre el momento regulatorio y el momento de implementación, ¿no? O sea, hablar de cómo es muy importante que en la legislación estén presentes los principios generales, ¿no? Las directrices y las prioridades que la legislación va a señalar, ¿no? Aquí se va a ver si sí vamos a hablar de justicia social, si sí vamos a hablar de salud pública, si va a tener un enfoque de derechos, un enfoque de género, etcétera. Y esta idea me parece que se conecta mucho con lo que Jazmin habló al final, ¿no? De la parte de representación y de estar presentes como ciudadanía en la toma de las decisiones. En un segundo sentido, me pareció también muy importante lo que mencionó Annette sobre la importancia de definir explícitamente al campesinado como una prioridad de la legislación, ¿no? Al campesino tradicional. Y justo Annette hizo énfasis en la palabra definición, ¿no? Hablar precisamente de este sector como un grupo que merece una atención diferenciada, justo por los daños de la guerra contra las drogas, ¿no? En un tercer sentido, también quería hablar de la importancia de identificar los tipos de mercados, ¿no? Los diferentes tipos de mercados que se quieren regular. Andrés habló del mercado farmacéutico, ¿no? Que es más complicado por la cuestión global y de la cuestión recreativa. Y en este mismo sentido, identificar las distintas barreras que se encuentran, ¿no? Sobre regulación, la barrera del capital, que hizo mucho énfasis en ella. Y por último, hablar de la importancia de encontrar este balance, ¿no? Por ejemplo, en México Unido habla mucho de cómo estos requisitos de trazabilidad y de testado y hasta del empaquetado pueden dificultar, si no hay otras medidas, pueden dificultar el acceso de este sector al mercado, ¿no? Entonces me gustó mucho el enfoque que utilizó Andrés, ¿no? De encontrar un balance de salud pública, de estándares de salud pública que adecuados para el mercado, pero al mismo tiempo pensar en maneras de evitar esta falta de acceso, ¿no? A través de acción afirmativa con Ministerio de Hacienda o señalar un presupuesto adecuado para este tipo de ayudas, ¿no? El laboratorio público, ¿no? Que señalaste como una posible propuesta. Y ya, cerrar con esa idea, ¿no? De la importancia del momento legislativo actual y que es el momento ahorita de pensar en las grandes soluciones y ya después pues darle seguimiento a todo este proceso.
Muchas gracias, Gerardo. Con esto damos por finalizada la sala y la jornada de este foro. Las otras dos salas ya cerraron. Nosotros nos extendimos, nos recorrimos un poquito. Así es que gracias a todas por estar aquí y nos vemos, esperemos muy pronto en el foro ya de implementación o evaluación de la política en México. Así que muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Gracias por la invitación. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego,
Gracias, igualmente.
por venir.
Gracias. Thank you.